the sterile world of high finance and cold acquisitions, Damien Thorne was a king. His empire, built on ruthless intellect, spanned the globe, yet his heart was a barren landscape haunted by a single fractured melody from a past he couldn't grasp. A lullaby, his only inheritance from a mother he never knew. One rainy night, seeking refuge in a place far beneath his station, he hears it. The full heartbreaking song sung by a struggling waitress to her sleeping child. That melody would ignite a journey into a buried past, unearthing a conspiracy of wealth and cruelty, and revealing a truth more shocking and transformative than any business deal he had ever closed. The rain fell on New York City, with a relentless percussive rhythm, each drop a tiny hammer against the panoramic windows of Damien Thorne's penthouse. From his vantage point on the 85th floor, the city was a sprawling circuit board of light, a testament to human ambition and resilience. It was his city in a way. He'd conquered its financial districts, his name whispered, with a mixture of awe and fear in boardrooms from Wall Street to Canary Wharf. At 38, Damien Thorne had everything a man could desire, a net worth with 10 zeros, a portfolio that dictated market trends, and a level of influence that made politicians answer his calls. Yet as he stood there, a glass of untouched Macallan, 1926 in hand, he felt an emptiness so profound it was a physical ache in his chest. His home was a monument to success, curated by a designer who specialized in soulful minimalism. It was all clean lines, cold marble, and art that cost more than most people's houses. It was soulless, a beautiful, expensive, and utterly hollow shell, much like the man who inhabited it. The source of this cavernous void hung around his neck, hidden beneath the fine silk of his shirt. It was a small, silver locket, tarnished with age. It wasn't expensive, but it was the single most priceless thing he owned. Inside one side was meant for a picture, but it was empty. The other side bore a tiny, intricate engraving of a weeping willow tree bending towards a crescent moon. He'd had it since he was an infant, left with him at the St. Jude's foundling home. It was his only link to a ghost, a woman he knew only as mother. Along with the locket came a memory, or rather, the fragment of one. A melody. A simple haunting tune that would surface in the quietest hours of the night. He could hum a few bars, a lilting, melancholic strain of music, but the words were gone, lost to the fog of infancy. He'd spent a small fortune on musicologists, historians, and folklorists trying to identify it. They all came back empty-handed. It was unique, they said. A personal song, a family song, his family's song. The thought was a bitter irony. Tonight, the emptiness was particularly acute. He had just closed a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, a brutal, merciless campaign that had left careers and reputations in tatters. His team was celebrating at a Michelin-starred restaurant downtown. He should have been there the conquering hero, but the victory felt as hollow as his penthouse. He craved something real, something that wasn't transactional. On a whim born of sheer restlessness, he bypassed his driver and took one of his less conspicuous cars, a vintage Aston Martin, DB5, out into the deluge. He drove without a destination, letting the rhythm of the wipers and the slick hiss of the tires on wet asphalt guide him. He drove past the glittering facades of Midtown, through the vibrant chaos of the village, and found himself in a quieter, older part of Brooklyn he hadn't seen in years. It was a neighborhood of brownstones and small family-owned shops, a world away from his sterile existence. The rain intensified, and the car's engine, usually a purring beast, sputtered and died. Damien swore under his breath. Of all the nights for the meticulously maintained classic to fail. Stranded. A billionaire stranded in the rain like a character in a bad movie. He was about to call his security detail when a warm yellow light cut through the gloom. It came from a small corner diner, its neon sign flickering bravely against the storm, the Midnight Spoon. It was the antithesis of every establishment he frequented. It looked worn, dated, but warm. He could either sit in his dead car in a bespoke suit or get a cup of coffee. With a sigh of resignation, he pulled up the collar of his coat and made a dash for the entrance. A small bell chimed as he entered, announcing his arrival. The air inside was thick with the scent of coffee frying bacon and something sweet like cinnamon. It was a small, narrow space with red vinyl booths, a long formica counter, and a jukebox that looked like it hadn't played a song since 1985. An elderly man with a kind face was wiping down the counter, and in a corner booth, a young woman was gently rocking a small bundle in her arms. Damien felt immediately out of place. His suit alone was probably worth more than the entire diner's inventory. He slid into a booth as far from the door as possible, feeling the stares of the few other patrons. The man from the counter, whose name tag read George, shuffled over with a menu. "Nasty night," George said, his voice a gravelly but friendly rumble. "Coffee." "Please," Damien said, his own voice sounding clipped and foreign in the cozy space. "Black." As George went to pour the coffee, Damien's attention drifted back to the woman in the corner. She looked tired. Her waitress uniform was neat but faded, and there were dark circles under her eyes, but her face, as she looked down at the child in her arms, was filled with a tenderness so pure it almost hurt to look at. The child, a little boy of about 3 or 4, was stirring fitfully, his face scrunched up against an impending cry. The woman leaned in, close her lips near the boy's ear, and began to hum. Damien froze the heavy ceramic mug halfway to his lips. It was the melody, not the fragment he knew, not the ghost of a tune that haunted his dreams. It was the full, complete song flowing with a grace and certainty that sent a jolt through his entire body, as if lightning had struck him through the floorboards of the diner. His heart hammered against his ribs. The clatter of cutlery, the hiss of the coffee machine, the drumming of the rain, it all faded into a deafening roar in his ears, leaving only that impossible music. Then she began to sing. Her voice was soft, not professionally trained, but clear and filled with love. And for the first time in his 38 years, Damien Thorne heard the words that belonged to his melody. The willow weeps, but not in sorrow. He sheds his leaves for a new tomorrow. The river flows to meet the sea. My dearest love, come back to me. Every word was a key turning a lock deep inside him. It was a song of loss, but also of hope, a song of waiting. The crescent moon, a silver tear, shines for the one I hold so dear. Though darkness falls and stars may flee, my dearest love, come back to me. The world tilted on its axis. Damien's hand trembled, rattling the mug against the saucer. George looked over, concerned. "Everything all right, mister?" Damien couldn't speak. He could only stare at the woman, this complete stranger, in a rundown diner who was singing the song of his soul, the song of his mother. How was this possible? Was this some elaborate cosmic joke? The little boy, soothed by the familiar tune, settled back into a peaceful sleep. The woman kissed his forehead, her expression one of utter devotion. She looked up, catching Damien's intense, unblinking stare. A flicker of confusion, then wariness crossed her face. He didn't care. He had to know. Who was she? And where in God's name did she get that song? The questions burned in his mind, eclipsing everything else. His business, his wealth the dead Aston Martin outside. In that moment, in the humble warmth of the midnight spoon, the king of finance was just a lost little boy who had finally heard his mother's voice. The connection once made was electric. Damien's world, which had been grey and predictable for so long, was now saturated with a single vibrant colour, the sound of that lullaby. For a full minute he remained frozen in his booth, the waitress's wary gaze locked on his. In her eyes, he was just a strange, intense man in an expensive suit staring at her and her child. In his eyes, she was a miracle, or a phantom, a keeper of a sacred trust he never knew existed. His mind trained to analyze, to dissect, to find the angle in every situation, kicked into overdrive, overriding the initial wave of pure emotion. The first thought that surfaced was one of deep, ingrained cynicism. It was a setup. It had to be. How many people knew of his search for the lullaby? His inner circle was small, but leaks were always possible. He'd been the target of scams before, long-lost relatives emerging from the woodwork investment schemes, wrapped in sob stories. Was this just the most elaborate, most personal one yet? He pushed himself out of the booth, his movements stiff. He walked towards her corner, his 6'2" frame casting a long shadow over her table. The woman instinctively pulled her sleeping son Cody closer, her body language shifting from weary to defensive. "My name is Eliza May," she said, her voice quiet but firm, preempting his question. "Is there something I can help you with?" Damien ignored the pleasantry. His tone was cold, accusatory. "The song," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The one you were just singing. Where did you learn it?" Eliza blinked, taken aback by his aggression. I don't understand. It's just a lullaby." "It is not just a lullaby." Damien bit back the control he exerted over every other aspect of his life, fraying at the edges. "That song is private. It's a family song. My family's song." A flicker of disbelief, then offense, crossed Eliza's face. She had dealt with her share of difficult customers, but this was different. There was a raw, desperate energy coming off this man that was genuinely unnerving. "I think you're mistaken," she said, her voice gaining an edge of steel. "That was my grandmother's song. She sang it to my mother, and my mother sang it to me. Now I sing it to my son. It belongs to my family." Her conviction was absolute. There was no hint of deception in her eyes, only a fierce, protective pride. This wasn't the reaction of a con artist caught in a lie. This was the indignation of someone whose heritage was being challenged by a stranger. Damien's cynical theory began to crumble, replaced by a bewildering confusion. "Your grandmother!" He pressed his mind racing. What was her name? Where did she live? Her name was Rose. Eliza answered, her chin tilted up defiantly. "And I don't see how that's any of your business." George, the owner, began to shuffle over a heavy-duty spatula held in his hand like a makeshift weapon. "Is there a problem here, Eliza?" "I'm fine, George," she said, though she kept her eyes locked on Damien. Damien held up a hand, a gesture of de-escalation. He needed to change his approach. The brute force interrogation of a CEO wasn't working in this place. He needed to show vulnerability, a currency he rarely, if ever, traded in. He retreated a step and sank into the opposite side of her booth, a move that was both an intrusion and a plea. The leather of his expensive shoes squeaked against the vinyl seat. "My name is Damien Thorne," he said, his voice softer now, laced with a weariness that was not an act. I never knew my parents. I was left at a foundling home as an infant. The only thing I have from my mother is a locket and a fragment of that song. Just the melody. I've spent years of fortune trying to find it, to learn where it came from. Until tonight, I believed I was the only person on earth who knew it existed. He reached inside his shirt and pulled out the silver locket, laying it on the table between them. The worn silver gleamed under the diner's fluorescent lights. He opened it, showing her the empty picture frame and the intricate engraving of the weeping willow and the moon. Eliza stared at the locket, her defensive posture slowly melting away. Her eyes widened, a dawning realization in their depths. She looked from the locket to Damien's face, searching for something. The silence in the booth was thick with unspoken history. "The willow weeps, but not in sorrow," she whispered, reciting the first line of the lullaby. Her gaze was fixed on the engraving. "He sheds his leaves for a new tomorrow." It was a confirmation. The symbol and the song were inextricably linked. My grandmother rose. "She used to draw that picture," Eliza said, her voice barely audible. "On napkins in the margins of books, the willow and the moon. She said it was a symbol of undying love, of waiting for someone to return." Damien felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. This was real. The connection was real. This tired waitress in this forgotten corner of the city held the key to his entire identity. "I need your help," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He was a man who gave orders, who solved problems with money and power. He never asked for help. "I need to know everything your grandmother told you. Everything about that song, about that symbol." Eliza looked at her sleeping son, his small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. She was a single mother, working double shifts at a diner to make ends meet, living in a tiny apartment above a laundromat. Her life was a constant struggle for survival. And now this man, who looked like he owned the world, was sitting in her booth, claiming a piece of her past, her family's most treasured heirloom. "Why should I?" she asked, her voice regaining some of its earlier strength. "This song is all I have left of my mother and my grandmother. It's personal. It's ours." Damien understood. It was a fair question. He couldn't just demand her story. He had to offer something in return. "Because," he began, leaning forward, his eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I believe our families are connected. I believe that song is a bridge between my past and your present, and if we cross it together, we might find the truth on the other side. A truth I will pay any price to uncover." He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the conflict between her protective instinct and a budding curiosity. He knew he had to sweeten the deal to speak her language, the language of survival. "I'll make you an offer, Ms. May," he said, his voice shifting back to the familiar cadence of a businessman closing a deal. "Quit your job, today. I will pay you a salary 5 times what you make here to work for me. Your only job will be to help me solve this mystery. I'll get a proper car seat for your son, and my driver will take you wherever you need to go. I will take care of all your expenses, your rent, your bills, everything. All I ask in return is your story, your memories, your help." Eliza stared at him, speechless. It was an insane proposal, a fairy tale offer from a dark, imposing stranger. It could be a trick. It could be dangerous. But then she looked down at Cody, at his worn-out sneakers, and the hand-me-down jacket he wore. She thought of the overdue medical bill on her counter, at home the landlord's latest notice. Damien's offer wasn't just about money, it was about security. It was about giving her son a life free from the constant anxiety that she lived with every day. And beyond that, there was the mystery itself. The locket on the table was undeniable proof of a connection. Her grandmother Rose had always been a woman of secrets, of sad stories hinted at, but are never fully told. Perhaps this was a chance to understand her own past as well. "Okay," she said, the word coming out as a shaky breath. "Okay, Mr. Thorne, I'll help you." A wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled him, washed over Damien. It was the first glimmer of hope he'd felt in decades. He pulled out a sleek black business card and a pen. "This is my personal number," he said, writing another number on the back. "This second one is for my head of security, Gavin Reed. He'll arrange everything. A car will be here to pick you and your son up in the morning. We'll start tomorrow." He stood up his presence once again, filling the small space. He laid a few $100 bills on the table, more than enough to cover his coffee and to signal his seriousness. "Thank you, Eliza," he said, and for the first time he used her name. It felt significant, a verbal handshake, sealing their strange and sudden pact. As he walked out of the diner and back into the rain, leaving the warmth and the scent of coffee behind Damien Thorne, felt a shift in the very foundation of his being. The hollow man who had walked in was now a man with a purpose. The hunt was on. Not for a company, not for profit, but for a ghost, for a mother, for the full story behind the willow and the moon. The following morning was a study in contrasts. While Damien was orchestrating the day from his penthouse office, fielding calls about the Asian market opening and the fallout from his latest acquisition, Eliza was nervously packing a small bag in her cramped apartment. True to his word, a sleek black town car, dwarfing the other vehicles on her street, was waiting downstairs. Inside a brand new top-of-the-line car seat was already installed. Their first meeting point was not a sterile boardroom, but a place of Eliza's choosing her late grandmother's house, a small, dusty bungalow in Queens that had sat unoccupied since her passing 2 years prior. Eliza had never had the heart or the money to properly sort through it. Damien arrived with his head of security, Gavin Reed, a sharp, discerning man in his late 40s with the quiet competence of a former intelligence officer. Damien had expected to find Eliza overwhelmed. Instead, she was resolute, directing them with a newfound sense of purpose. She kept everything, Eliza explained, leading them through the small house where the air was thick with the scent of lavender and old paper. She never threw anything away. She said every object had a story. The house was a time capsule. Furniture was draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. Photographs in tarnished silver frames lined the mantelpiece. They showed a younger Eliza, her mother who had passed away from an illness 5 years ago, and a woman with kind, knowing eyes and a gentle smile, Rose. "The attic," Eliza said. She had a large trunk up there. Her memory chest, she called it. Gavin, ever practical, checked the structural integrity of the pull-down stairs before allowing Damien and Eliza to ascend into the dusty space. Light streamed in from a single grimy window, illuminating dancing dust motes. In the corner, under a thick layer of dust, sat a large, dark wood steamer trunk, bound with brass straps. As Gavin worked the stiff rusted latch, Damien felt a surge of anticipation that rivaled the closing of his biggest deals. This was it, the source code of his past. The trunk opened with a mournful creak. The top layer contained predictable keepsakes, yellowed baby clothes, a christening gown, dried flowers pressed between wax paper. But as Eliza carefully lifted the items out, they began to find more. Bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, old sepia-toned photographs of people she didn't recognize, and at the very bottom, nestled in velvet lining, was a thick, leather-bound journal. Eliza lifted it out reverently. On the cover, embossed in faded gold leaf, was a single initial R. "Rose's diary," she whispered. They took the diary back to the living room, wiping the dust from a small coffee table. Cody, who had been exploring the strange new house with a quiet curiosity, was now happily occupied with a new high-tech tablet Gavin had produced a silent guardian, watching from the doorway. Eliza opened the diary. The handwriting was a beautiful looping cursive, The ink faded from black to a soft brown. The entries began over 60 years ago. For the first hour they read through Rose's daily life as a young woman, her hopes and dreams her first job. And then they found the name. October 12th, 1968. Started my new position today. I am to be a lady's maid at the Ashworth Manor on Long Island. It is the grandest place I have ever seen, a palace of stone and ivy that looks out over the Sound. My charge is the daughter of the house, Miss Catherine Ashworth. She is only 17, but has a spirit that is too big for this cold, quiet house. She has sad eyes, but she laughs like wind chimes. I think we are going to be friends. Damien's breath hitched. Catherine Ashworth. The name felt like a physical object in the room. They read on, devouring the pages. Eliza read aloud, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. The diary painted a vivid picture of a friendship blossoming in secret. Rose, the loyal maid, and Catherine, the lonely heiress, trapped in a gilded cage by her domineering father, a man named Harrison Ashworth. April 5th, 69. Catherine has a secret, a beautiful, wonderful secret. His name is Robert. He is a painter with no money to his name, but a universe in his eyes. He has a small studio in the village. She sneaks out to see him, and I help her. I cover for her when her father asks where she has been. I know it is wrong to lie, but the way her face lights up when she speaks of him, it is the only time the sadness leaves her eyes. It is a love you only read about in books. Damien felt a strange kinship with this Robert, this phantom father he'd never known. An artist. It explained the soul of the music, the poetry of the lyrics. Then came the entry they were searching for. July 22nd, 1969. Catherine is with child, Robert's child. She is terrified and ecstatic all at once. Her father, Mr. Ashworth, would be apoplectic. He would ruin Robert and disown her. We must keep this secret for as long as we can. Tonight, Robert was working on a lullaby for the baby. He composed the most beautiful haunting melody on his old guitar. Catherine, who writes such lovely poetry, penned the words. It's about their love, about waiting about the willow tree by his studio where they first met, under a crescent moon. She called it, "The Willow Weeps for the Moon." They sang it together. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I have ever heard. There it was. The origin story. The lullaby wasn't just a song. It was a collaboration of love between his mother and father. A vow. A promise to their unborn child. The subsequent entries grew darker. They chronicled Catherine's secret pregnancy, hidden away in a small cottage Rose helped her secure. They described Harrison Ashworth's growing suspicion, his tightening grip on his daughter's life. The final entries were frantic, written in a shaky, tear-blotched script. March 14th, 1970. He found out. Mr. Ashworth found out everything. He came to the cottage today. I have never seen such fury in a man's eyes. He called Robert a fortune-hunting degenerate. He called Catherine a disgrace to the Ashworth name. He dragged her away. He told her she was a fool if she thought she would be allowed to keep a pauper's bastard. He said he would take care of it. March 18th, 1970. Catherine is gone. Her father sent her away. He won't tell me where. He threatened me, told me, if I ever spoke of this to anyone, he would see to it that I never worked again, that my family would suffer. The baby. Catherine's beautiful baby boy was born 2 days ago. I saw him for just a moment. He has Catherine's eyes. A nurse paid by Mr. Ashworth took him. They are sending him to a foundling home in the city. She managed to give me the small silver locket Robert had made for Catherine, the one with the willow and moon engraved on it. She told me to make sure the baby had it. It was all she could do. I feel so helpless. I have lost my friend, and a little boy has lost his mother." The diary ended there. The remaining pages were blank. The room was silent, save for the soft tapping of Cody's finger on the tablet screen. Eliza closed the book, her face pale. She looked at Damien, and for the first time, she saw him not as a billionaire or an employer, but as the baby boy from the diary, the baby boy her grandmother had mourned. "My grandmother, she kept this secret her whole life," Eliza whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "She carried this sadness for you, for your mother." Damien felt a storm of emotions rage at this Harrison Ashworth, a profound sorrow for the young, terrified parents he never knew, and a deep, soul-shaking gratitude for Rose, the woman who had ensured he had his one link to them. He looked at Eliza, the waitress from the diner, the granddaughter of his mother's only friend. They weren't just connected by a song. Their families were interwoven by a shared history of love, loyalty, and tragedy. She wasn't just a key to his past. She was a part of it. Gavin Reed, who had been listening intently from the doorway, finally spoke his voice, cutting through the heavy emotional air. "Harrison Ashworth," he said, pulling out his phone. "It's a prominent name, old money, very private. If he was a formidable man in 1970, he's a titan now. And if he went to these lengths to cover this up, then he won't be happy about us digging it up now." Damien's jaw tightened. The grief in his heart was hardening into something else, resolve. "I don't care," Damien said, his voice a low growl. "He took my mother. He took my father. He tried to erase me. He failed. Find him, Gavin, and find out what happened to my mother. Find Catherine Ashworth." The hunt was no longer just for a story. It was for a reckoning. Gavin Reed was ruthlessly efficient. While Damien and Eliza were still processing the contents of the diary, he was already mobilizing a team of researchers and investigators. The name Ashworth was the key that unlocked a labyrinth of information, most of it shielded behind layers of wealth management firms, private trusts, and a formidable wall of legal power. The preliminary report came within 48 hours. Harrison Ashworth was 91 years old, a reclusive patriarch who ruled his family's empire from the same Long Island estate mentioned in Rose's diary. He was a figure of immense unseen power, a puppeteer who had pulled the strings of politics and finance for over half a century. The report also contained a crucial, shocking piece of information. There was no public record of Catherine Ashworth's death. Gavin's investigators had to dig deeper, using back channels and discreet inquiries. What they found was chilling. Shortly after Damien's birth, Catherine Ashworth, then 18, was admitted to Briarwood Grove Sanitarium, a private long-term care facility in upstate New York, known for its discretion and its wealthy clientele. The official diagnosis on the committal form signed by her father was acute hysteria and emotional instability. She had been a patient there ever since. She was alive. The words hit Damien with the force of a physical blow. For his entire life, he had mourned a ghost. A beautiful, tragic memory. He had imagined visiting a gravestone laying flowers for the mother he never knew. The idea that she was alive, that she had been locked away for nearly 50 years, just a few hours' drive away, was incomprehensible. The sorrow he had felt morphed into a white-hot rage. "He didn't just send her away," Damien snarled, pacing his office like a caged predator. "He buried her alive." Eliza, who was sitting opposite his desk, felt a cold dread creep over her. All those years. My grandmother thought she was just gone. She never knew. "He wanted her silenced," Gavin said grimly, looking at the file on his tablet. "Briarwood is more like a luxurious prison than a hospital. Access is impossible without family consent, and Harrison Ashworth controls all of it. Her legal guardianship, her finances, her visitation rights. He's completely walled her off from the world. Then we'll tear the wall down, Damien declared. He looked at Gavin. Arrange a meeting. I want to see him, face to face. Sir, a direct confrontation might not be wise, Gavin cautioned. He'll stonewall you. He'll unleash his lawyers. Let him, Damien said, his eyes like flint. He needs to know that his secret is out. He needs to see the son he tried to throw away. I want to look him in the eye when I tell him I'm coming for my mother. 2 days later, Damien's car swept through the imposing wrought-iron gates of Ashworth Manor. The estate was exactly as Rose had described it, a palace of cold stone and manicured gardens, beautiful but devoid of warmth. As they approached the main entrance, Damien felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was the house where his mother grew up, the place she had fled from to be with his father. They were shown into a vast dark wood library by a stern-faced butler. Bookshelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked as if they had never been read. Seated behind a massive mahogany desk silhouetted against a large window overlooking the Sound was Harrison Ashworth. Even at 91, he was an imposing figure. He was rail-thin with a shock of white hair and pale, piercing blue eyes that held no hint of frailty. They were the eyes of a hawk, missing nothing. He did not stand. Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice a dry rustle of old paper and steel. My staff informs me you are quite insistent. I am a busy man. State your purpose. Damien walked forward, stopping directly in front of the desk. He placed the silver locket on the polished wood the same way he had in the diner. Harrison Ashworth glanced at it, his expression unreadable. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something recognition annoyance crossed his face before it was replaced by a mask of cold indifference. A trinket, he said dismissively. If you are here to sell me something, you have wasted a journey. It belonged to your daughter Catherine, Damien said, his voice steady and cold. My mother. The old man's eyes narrowed. The air in the room grew thick with tension. He steepled his long, thin fingers and stared at Damien, a predator assessing a threat. I have no idea what you are talking about, he said. My daughter has been unwell for a very long time. Her mind, it creates fantasies. Was Robert a fantasy? Damien pressed, his anger rising. Was the child she carried a fantasy? The son you had taken from her and dumped in a foundling home? Was I a fantasy, Mr. Ashworth? Harrison leaned back in his chair, a faint, contemptuous smile touching his lips. It was a confirmation. You have a certain intensity, the old man mused. Just like him, the painter, a penniless degenerate who thought he could worm his way into my family. He filled my daughter's head with nonsense about art and love, polluting her good sense and her bloodline. I did what was necessary to protect her, to protect the Ashworth name from disgrace. You destroyed her life, Damien spat. You locked her away and threw away her son. That isn't protection. That's monstrous. You call it monstrous. I call it preservation. Harrison retorted, his voice like ice. Look at you. You seem to have done quite well for yourself. I inadvertently gave you the grit and ambition you never would have learned in the lap of luxury. You should be thanking me. As for Catherine, she is safe. She is cared for. Her episodes are managed. It is a far better fate than raising a bastard in poverty. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the man was breathtaking. He felt no remorse, no guilt. He saw his actions as justified, even noble. I want to see her, Damien demanded. Harrison chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. That is out of the question. I am her legal guardian. Access to her is at my sole discretion, and I do not grant it. She is at peace. You will not disturb her with your presence, reopening old wounds and agitating her condition." "You're afraid," Damien said, a sudden realization dawning on him. "You're afraid that if she sees me, she'll remember, that she'll find her voice again, that the world will find out what you did." "I'm afraid of nothing," Harrison snapped, his composure finally cracking. "Least of all a belligerent upstart with a misplaced sense of sentimentality. Now this meeting is over. Leave my house, and I advise you to drop this matter entirely. My reach is long, Mr. Thorne, longer than you can possibly imagine. You have built a considerable empire. It would be a shame if something were to happen to it." It was a clear threat, a declaration of war. Damien stared at the old man, a cold fury settling deep within him. The desire for a simple reunion had now been forged into an ironclad mission. It was no longer just about finding his mother, it was about liberating her. He turned and walked away from the desk without another word. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back at the man who had shaped his life through an act of supreme cruelty. "You're wrong about one thing," Damien said, his voice echoing in the silent library. "You didn't get rid of the painter's son. You created a rival, and I will not stop until she is free." As he left the cold mansion and got back into the waiting car, the battle lines were drawn. Harrison Ashworth had wealth legacy and the law on his side, but Damien Thorne had a lifetime of pent-up anger, near limitless resources, and something the old man had never counted on another heir to the Lullaby waiting to help him fight. The war with Harrison Ashworth was fought not on a battlefield, but in the sterile corridors of law firms and the shadowy world of private investigation. The old man was true to his word. Damien's businesses faced a sudden onslaught of regulatory hurdles, frivolous lawsuits and hostile media coverage, all orchestrated from the shadows. Harrison was trying to bleed him, to distract him, to force him to retreat and protect his empire. But Damien's resolve was absolute. He delegated the defense of his company to his most trusted executives, his focus narrowing to a single objective: Briarwood Grove. Gavin Reed's team worked around the clock searching for a legal loophole, a chink in Harrison's armor. They found one. It was a recent obscure amendment to state healthcare law regarding patient rights, intended to prevent the very kind of isolation Catherine was experiencing. It stipulated that a patient, even under guardianship, could not be denied contact with a direct blood relative who could prove their identity unless that patient was deemed mentally unfit by a court-appointed physician, not just the facility's doctors. Harrison had controlled the doctors at Briarwood for decades, but he couldn't control the state. It was their opening. They filed an emergency petition with the court, submitting the DNA evidence that had already been discreetly collected and tested, proving beyond any doubt that Damien Thorne was the biological son of Catherine Ashworth. They attached a copy of Rose's diary and a sworn affidavit from Eliza. A judge, intrigued and disturbed by the petition, granted an expedited hearing. Harrison's lawyers fought furiously, but the evidence was undeniable. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Maria Hernandez, ruled in Damien's favor. He was granted a court order for immediate unrestricted access to his mother. He was going to see her. Eliza insisted on coming with him. "This isn't just your fight," she had said, her voice firm. "My grandmother would have wanted someone from our family to be there. For Catherine." Cody was left in the care of a trusted nanny that Damien had hired, a new fixture in their rapidly changing lives. The drive upstate to Briarwood Grove was silent and heavy with anticipation. The facility was less of a hospital and more of a country club, set behind high walls and towering pines. It was beautiful, serene, and deeply unsettling. They were met by a stern-faced administrator who clearly viewed their court order with contempt but was powerless to stop them. She led them down a plushly carpeted hallway to a private suite overlooking a tranquil garden. "She has good days and bad days," the administrator said, her tone clinical. "Years of medication have had an effect. Do not be alarmed if she seems distant." Then she opened the door. And there she was. Catherine Ashworth was sitting in an armchair by the window, a cashmere blanket draped over her lap. Her hair, once the dark auburn described in Rose's diary, was now a soft, snowy white, cut in a simple bob. She was frail, her skin pale and translucent, but Damien could see the faint echoes of the young woman in the old photographs. She had her father's piercing blue eyes, but they were clouded vacant, gazing out at the garden without really seeing it. Damien's heart felt like it was going to break. This was what his grandfather's protection looked like. A life stolen, a spirit dimmed, a mind dulled by decades of forced tranquility. "Catherine," he said, his voice a choked whisper. She didn't turn. There was no reaction at all. Eliza put a gentle, steadying hand on Damien's arm. He walked slowly into the room, kneeling down in front of her chair, so he was at her eye level. "Catherine, my name is Damien. I'm your son." Her gaze drifted towards him, but there was no spark of recognition. Just a polite, empty confusion. The administrator's words echoed in his head. Distant. It was worse than distant. It was like she wasn't there at all. The years of isolation and medication had done their work. He had won the battle only to find the person he'd come to liberate was already gone. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. Eliza watched the heartbreaking scene, tears blurring her vision. She saw Damien's hope crumbling, his iron resolve shattering against this wall of quiet emptiness. She thought of her grandmother, of the love and loyalty that had been kept secret for so long. She thought of the song, the bridge between them all. Stepping forward, Eliza began to sing. Her voice was soft, hesitant at first, but grew stronger as she poured all the love and legacy she had inherited into the melody. "The willow weeps, but not in sorrow. He sheds his leaves for a new tomorrow." At the first notes, a flicker of something passed through Catherine's vacant eyes. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift. Her head tilted slightly, as if listening to a sound from a long-forgotten dream. Damien held his breath, watching his mother's face. Eliza continued, her voice filling the sterile room with warmth and history. "The river flows to meet the sea. My dearest love, come back to me." Catherine's pale, slender fingers, which had been resting limply on the blanket, twitched. Her lips parted slightly. "The crescent moon, a silver tear shines for the one I hold so dear." And then the miracle happened. A voice, raspy from disuse, but clear as a bell, joined Eliza's. It was Catherine. "Though darkness falls and stars may flee," she sang, her eyes slowly focusing on Damien's face. The fog was lifting. The clouds were parting. "My dearest love, come back to me." Tears streamed down Damien's face. He didn't bother to wipe them away. "Robert," Catherine whispered, her gaze locked on Damien. He had the artist's intensity, the eyes she hadn't seen in 50 years. "No," Damien said, his voice thick with emotion, as he took her fragile hand in his. "It's Damien, your son." Recognition dawned, not just of him, but of everything. The memories suppressed for decades came flooding back. The love, the loss, the baby she thought she'd never see again. Her face, which had been a mask of placid emptiness, crumpled with a lifetime of stored-up grief and love. "My baby," she cried, her hand tightening on his. My beautiful baby boy." Damien leaned forward and wrapped his arms around her frail shoulders, holding his mother for the first time. He was no longer Damien Thorne, the billionaire titan. He was just a son, finally home. Eliza stood back, weeping silently, a witness to the reunion her grandmother had only ever prayed for. The lullaby had done what lawyers and court orders could not. It had crossed the chasm of time and trauma and brought a mother back to her son. The willow and the moon, separated for half a century, were finally reunited. 6 months later, the penthouse on the 85th floor was unrecognizable. The soulful minimalism had been replaced by genuine soul. Sunlight, once sterile as it cut across marble floors, now seemed to dance, illuminating a home filled with life. The scent of Damien's expensive cologne was now mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of Eliza's baking and the floral perfume Catherine favored. Cody's colorful drawings were taped to the billion-dollar refrigerator, their value immeasurable. Damien found his mother in the sunroom, the glass walls offering the same panoramic view he once saw as a kingdom to be conquered. Now it was simply the backdrop to his life. Catherine was no longer the frail, distant woman from Briarwood. Color had returned to her cheeks, and the fog in her eyes had been replaced by a clear, intelligent light. In her hands, she held a small framed charcoal sketch. It was a portrait of a young woman with sad, hopeful eyes and wind-chime laughter, a sketch of herself drawn by Robert. It was one of several pieces Damien's investigators had tracked down and acquired from private collections. "He always saw the hope," Catherine said softly, as Damien and Eliza entered the room. "Even when all I felt was fear." Eliza smiled, placing a tray with tea and cookies on the table. Rose said he had a universe in his eyes. I think he just put what he saw onto the canvas. A comfortable quiet settled between them, a language of shared history they had all become fluent in. News had reached them a month prior that Harrison Ashworth had passed away quietly in his sleep, alone in the vast, cold library of his estate. There was no grief among them, only a somber acknowledgement. His life was a cautionary tale, a man who had sacrificed every human connection to preserve a name, only to have that name die with him in silence. Damien reached for the silver locket, which he now kept on his nightstand. He handed it to his mother. "It's empty," he said. "I never knew what picture was supposed to go inside." Catherine took it, her fingers tracing the familiar engraving of the willow and the moon. "Your father gave this to me. He said it wasn't for holding a picture of the past. It was for holding the promise of a future." She opened it and looked from Damien to Eliza, her gaze filled with a profound, quiet gratitude. She then looked toward the living room, where Cody was showing his nanny a tower he had built. "The future," Catherine whispered, "turned out to be more beautiful than we ever dreamed." She closed the locket and handed it back to Damien. "It doesn't need a picture. Its story is complete. Our story is complete." Damien closed his hand around the small piece of silver. It no longer felt like a link to a ghost, but a testament to survival. He looked at Eliza, his partner, in this impossible journey, and at his mother, resurrected by a simple song. He realized the lullaby was never just about sorrow or waiting. It was about tomorrow. It was a promise that love, however deeply buried, would always find its way back home. In the end, Damien did more than just tear down the walls of Briarwood Grove. He tore down the walls around his own heart. He moved his mother Catherine to a world-class neurological facility near his home, where with the help of the best doctors and the constant presence of her family, her memories and her spirit began to return, day by day. He established a foundation in his parents' names, the Robert and Catherine Foundation, dedicated to supporting struggling artists and advocating for patients' rights. As for Harrison Ashworth, Damien chose not to pursue public revenge. The greatest defeat for the old man was not a financial loss, but the simple, undeniable fact that the family he tried to erase was now thriving, brought together by the love he could never extinguish. Damien, Eliza, and Cody became a new kind of family. The emptiness in Damien's lavish penthouse was filled with the sound of laughter, the clutter of Cody's toys, and often the soft shared melody of a lullaby. He was no longer just a millionaire. He was a son, a brother, a man who had found his true wealth in the echoes of a song. He had discovered that the most valuable thing in the world wasn't something you could acquire, but something you could come home to.